We're joined by Ruby Powers in Houston. Now, she is a lawyer specializing in immigration issues and a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Thanks for joining us today. So let's start first. Is there something specific about the living conditions that make these migrants more susceptible to illness or even potential for death?
I think we have two potential issues here. One, when people have been traveling by foot over difficult terrain for potentially for a couple of months, especially young children and those who are sick or pregnant women are more susceptible to illness. But second of all, a lot of these detention facilities were built for single adult males in general, not family units, and are generally remote and far away from a lot of regular specialized medical care. So it's a combination of issues.
So should they not have figured this out after the first tragedy happened with the 7-year-old girl, that these facilities aren't made for children?
I mean, I wish it wouldn't have had to wait for the second needless death of a young minor child to have more controls. They quickly came up with other solutions today of, a secondary check for children under 10 and looking to maybe working with other government agencies and NGOs. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And like in some places where they don't have family detention, like in California, for example, they just do a supervised release of family units. And in this situation as well, he was held way over the 72 hours, which is generally the limit for them to be held in CBP custody.
So is there something about the bureaucracy in how these migrants are being handled and processed?
I think so. I think that's just a bit of combination of passing off one person to the next and the lack of accountability and oversight. There's not just one centralized group just looking after them and just, passing them on to the next detention facility, the next location. And especially with a lot of these facilities not being capable of holding family units or young children.
So essentially, they don't have that constant person or care throughout the whole process, that it's different people?
Right. They'll be at one facility for a little while, then maybe processed to another location and then be sent to another. And so if there's not that consistency of monitoring what's going on, it could be little symptoms like a fever or such like that might be overlooked. And people, some of the children and some of the immigrants that are coming might not have ever had some specialized review of their medical situation. So I think there's a lot more screening that's necessary in the situation.
Right. So you're talking about more screening. They've also made some policy changes. But what other policy changes have the Customs and Border Protection Agency announced to address these issues?
Well, it's to have a secondary screening within 24 hours of those under 10, and also to work with other government agencies as well as NGOs and potentially use more supervised release, which is generally after just a short period of time being released and having like an ankle monitor or having some type of order supervision where you have to report, which they do that already in certain parts of the border. So I think that might need to be relooked where that's used to use that in other places, because they're seeing a lot more children and family units and unaccompanied minors coming to the border in the recent months.
So what specifically will you be watching for in the upcoming days?
Well, I want to make sure, I want to see that CBP does enact a lot of these policies that they've come up with recently to combat a future death of a young child and anyone who's in their custody. I think we're also waiting for some congressional oversight, but unfortunately, we do have the shutdown and Congress won't come into session until January. So there's those factors, as well as recently the Department of Homeland Security did announce that they would have a remain in Mexico policy for those entering not at a port of entry and at a port of entry. And so I think that a lot of the migrants who might have been in quote unquote the caravan, or people who've been planning to come to the US for the last month or two, are panicking. There's an anxiety of whether or not they need to come right now. And I think that's a part of the bigger picture.
Now, you just talked about the government shutdown there. Is this having a huge impact on the processing of these migrants, and what can they, expect over the next little bit of this shutdown?
For CBP and for detained immigration court, they're still functioning, but for other non-essential governmental, or quote unquote, non-government essential governmental services, they are not. I think in general, it could be slowing down things from access to certain medical care or certain higher up bureaucratic agencies that might not be accessible. A lot of people are on vacation during the next couple of weeks right now, but in general, the essential services like CBP and detained immigration court are still functioning at full force.
Ms. Ruby Powers, I want to thank you for your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Ruby Powers is an immigration lawyer based in Houston.